The rain in Chicago doesn't clean anything. It just gives the city a reason to hide. Cynthia Jenkins had been wiping the same section of counter at Lou's all night for so long, she could do it blind. The long drag from the sugar dispenser to the napkin rack, the short loop around the coffee ring that never fully lifted. Her hands knew the route better than her mind did. That was fine. Her mind was somewhere else, somewhere that cost more than she had. It was 2:17 in the morning on a Wednesday that felt like it had been going on for 3 days straight. The diner sat on the corner of Halsted and Nowhere Good, the kind of block that real estate developers photographed from moving cars and called a neighborhood in transition. What that meant, to Cynthia, was that the laundromat next door was now a juice bar, and the rent on her apartment had gone up twice since Christmas. She had $20 left in her apron. She needed $20 for the gas bill. She had exactly $0 for anything else, including the notification that had buzzed her phone at midnight. Final notice, Lone Bridge Financial. Payment of $340 due Friday. She turned that notification face down on the shelf below the register and didn't look at it again. The diner was nearly empty. A truck driver in the back corner had fallen asleep over a plate of half-eaten eggs, his snoring barely audible beneath the drumming of rain on the window. 2 men in construction jackets were nursing coffee at the counter, arguing in low voices about a Bears game that had ended badly. Behind the kitchen partition, Lou, the owner, was on the phone with someone he clearly owed money to, his voice a pressured hiss cutting through the grease smell and the hum of the refrigerator unit. This was Cynthia's world, every inch of it accounted for. Every sound familiar. She had worked this shift for 4 years. She knew every crack in the linoleum, every stool that wobbled, every light that buzzed before it flickered. She knew the walk-in had a busted latch that needed a hip check to close. She knew Lou docked her pay for breakage whenever he was short. She knew the couple in booth 5, who came in every Wednesday at 1 a.m. after their fight, never their date, would leave a $3 tip on a $19 bill and not make eye contact when they did it. She knew all of it. What Cynthia Jenkins did not know, what she could not have known, was that the door was about to open, and the rest of her life was about to walk through it looking like a lost grandmother. The bell above the door didn't jingle so much as shudder, rattled by a wind that pushed through like it was trying to get away from something outside. The rain came in with it, a cold, sideways spray that swept across the entrance mat and made the truck driver stir in his sleep. And then she appeared. She was small. That was the first thing Cynthia registered. Small in the way that makes you think of porcelain, the kind you're afraid to touch because it looks like it might already have a crack in it somewhere. She was Korean, perhaps 70 years old, perhaps older, the kind of face that had been beautiful for so long that even the years hadn't fully taken it, just traced it with more detail. Her silver hair was pinned neatly at the back of her head, though several strands had come loose and were now plastered to her cheek from the rain. She wore a coat, gray, long, impeccably cut, but it was soaked through, dark at the shoulders, dripping onto the mat. Her shoes were low-heeled, simple, and completely ruined from the wet. She stood in the doorway. She was not looking at the counter. She was not looking for a booth. She was looking at the space between the door and the back wall, the way a person looks when they've forgotten, for a moment, what a room is supposed to mean. Her eyes, dark, deep-set, sharp even through the confusion, moved across the diner once, twice. Her hands, clasped in front of her, tightened on each other. Cynthia had seen that look before. She'd seen it on her grandmother, in the months before the diagnosis. That specific blankness, not stupidity, not age, but displacement. Like the mind had stepped briefly outside and the body was waiting for it to come back. "Come on in, sweetheart," Cynthia called, her voice dropping into the gentle register she didn't use for everyone. "Take any seat you want. I'll bring coffee." The woman moved to the nearest booth and lowered herself into it slowly, carefully, the way people do when they're not sure the floor will hold. Cynthia grabbed the pot. When she reached the table, she saw things up close that she hadn't caught from the counter. The coat wasn't just well cut, it was made. The buttons were heavy, real, the kind that had weight. The woman's ring, a single band on her right hand, held a stone so deep green it looked like a piece of night sky in the wrong color. Her nails, even wet and slightly smudged, had been done recently. Not a salon job, something quieter and more expensive than a salon. None of it tracked with a woman standing alone in the rain at 2 a.m. You warm enough? Cynthia flipped a mug and poured. I've got a dry towel in the back if you want one. It's not luxury, but it's clean. The woman looked up. For a moment, something cleared in her expression, a sharpness arriving from somewhere behind the fog. She studied Cynthia the way you study a painting when you think it might be trying to tell you something. You are kind, she said. Her voice was low, accented, precise. You didn't have to say that. I know, Cynthia said simply. You want pie? We have cherry and we have apple. The cherry's better tonight. Something moved across the woman's face. Not quite a smile. Something more controlled than a smile, like a smile making a decision. Cherry, she said, please. She ate it slowly, like it mattered. Cynthia watched from behind the counter, the way the woman held her fork, the small, deliberate bites, the way she sat with her back straight, despite the exhaustion visible in every other part of her. Whoever this woman was, she had spent a lifetime refusing to slump. The construction workers left. The truck driver stirred, paid, shuffled out into the rain. The diner went quieter. And then Lou came out of the kitchen. Lou Petrocchi was built like a man who had once been strong and had let it go to architecture, wide, soft in the wrong places, with a face that defaulted to suspicion. He wiped his hands on his apron, scanned the room, and landed on the woman in booth 3, the way a hawk lands on something small moving in the grass. Hey! He walked toward her without preamble. You order something? The woman looked up calmly. Yes, cherry pie. The young woman brought it. You got a way to pay for it? Cynthia set down the coffee pot. Lou, I'm asking her, not you. He planted himself at the edge of the booth, arms crossed. I've had people sitting here all night on a cup of coffee and a sad look. You got cash? Card? Anything. The woman reached for her coat pocket, patted it once, then again. A small furrow appeared between her brows. Not panic, not embarrassment. More like the focused expression of someone solving a calculation. My bag, she said quietly. I believe I left it in the car. Yeah, Lou's mouth curved. Not kindly. Sure you did. Lou, Cynthia's voice came out flat. Stop. You want to pay for it, Jenkins, be my guest. Otherwise, ma'am, I need you to... I'll pay for it. She didn't decide it so much as it came out of her. The $20, the gas bill. The final notice from Lonebridge that was still face down on the shelf. All of it sitting right on the other side of what she was about to do. She reached into her apron and put the bill on the table before she could think about it twice. Lou stared at it, then at her. That's coming out of your drawer, not mine. I know what it's coming out of. He looked between them for a moment. The old woman with her expensive coat and her empty pockets, and the waitress who'd just handed over her gas money at 2 a.m. to cover a slice of pie for a stranger. Then he walked back to the kitchen without another word. The woman looked at the $20. Then she looked at Cynthia. That same expression from before, measuring, still, precise. You didn't have to do that either, she said. Cynthia picked up the coffee pot again. Nobody has to do anything, she said. Doesn't mean it's not the right call. The woman was quiet for a long moment. Then she said very softly, no, it doesn't. Outside, a black SUV with tinted windows had been parked across the street for 11 minutes. Its engine was running, its lights were off, and the man behind the wheel had just raised a radio to his mouth. She's inside, he said. Alone, someone is with her. A pause. No, a waitress. Nobody. Another pause. Longer. Understood. Cynthia Jenkins had $0 left in her apron. She had no idea that the woman eating cherry pie in booth 3 had a name that made grown men go quiet in rooms from Bridgeport to Seoul. She had no idea that in approximately 4 hours, her apartment would no longer feel safe, her life would no longer feel like hers, and the word nobody, the word that man had used to describe her across a rain-soaked street, was about to be made very, very wrong. In a city that swallows the invisible whole, Cynthia Jenkins had just done the one thing you are never supposed to do in someone else's war. She had shown up. If you stopped scrolling for Cynthia, you already know this story has you. Subscribe right now so the next chapter finds you. Don't let the what you came here for. And drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. I want to say hello to every single one of you personally. Let me know what time it is where you are, because this story is clearly traveling further than I imagined. Lou didn't fire her that night. He waited until the morning rush was over, which Cynthia suspected was less about decency and more about needing someone to cover the breakfast plates. She worked the full shift. She refilled coffee she wouldn't be paid for, wiped tables she wouldn't see again, and smiled at customers who didn't look up from their phones long enough to notice her face. At 6:47 a.m., Lou called her to the back. He didn't make it complicated. He was that kind of man. No ceremony, no cushion. He pulled an envelope from the shelf above the prep station and set it on the counter between them. 2 weeks. That's more than I owe you. He didn't say you're fired. He didn't have to. Cynthia looked at the envelope, then at him. Because I bought a slice of pie. Because you cost me more than a slice of pie every time you decide this place is a charity. He crossed his arms. You're a good worker, Jenkins. You're a terrible employee. There's a difference. She picked up the envelope. She didn't argue. There was nothing to argue with. He wasn't wrong about what she'd done, only about whether it had been worth doing. And on that point, they would never agree. She untied her apron, folded it in thirds the way she always had, and set it on the counter. 4 years of closing shifts. 4 years of burnt coffee smell and linoleum and Lou's accounting logic. She had memorized this place the way you memorize something you never intended to stay in. She walked out through the front, not the back. The rain had lightened to a gray drizzle, the kind that doesn't commit. Chicago in November had a way of making the whole city feel like it was waiting for something worse. Cynthia stood on the sidewalk outside Lou's all night with her 2-week envelope and her empty apron pocket and the particular feeling of a door closing that you hadn't realized you were leaning on. She had in her apron. She had $340 due Friday. She had no job. She started walking. The bus home took 22 minutes when the traffic was light and longer when it wasn't. This morning, it wasn't. Cynthia sat near the back, her jacket pulled around her, watching the city move outside the window. Bridgeport in the early morning had its own rhythm. Delivery trucks double parked on narrow streets, corner stores pulling up their security gates, school kids in puffy coats moving in clusters against the wind. She had grown up 6 blocks from this route. She knew these streets the way she knew the counter at Lou's, by feel, by repetition, by the particular wariness of something that had never quite become home but had become hers. She thought about her sister, Destiny, who was probably still asleep in the apartment they shared on South Loomis. Destiny was 19, 2 semesters into a nursing program at City College, working weekend shifts at a pharmacy on Archer. She was the one with the plan. Cynthia had always been the one buying time so the plan could breathe. She pulled out her phone and looked at the Lone Bridge notification again. $340 by Friday. After that, the penalties compounded. She'd read the fine print twice, both times feeling the particular nausea of numbers that only moved in one direction. She had taken the loan 8 months ago when the apartment heat went out, and the landlord took 6 weeks to fix it, and the space heaters alone were eating $40 a month in electricity. It had seemed manageable at the time. Most traps do from the outside. She put the phone back in her pocket. She would figure it out. She had always figured it out. That was the thing about being the person everyone leaned on. You didn't get the option of not figuring it out. You just put your head down and moved forward until the problem either solved itself or became a different problem. And either way, you were still moving. The bus stopped 2 blocks from her building, and Cynthia stepped off into the drizzle. She noticed the cars before she reached the corner. Not because they were loud or moving. They weren't. That was exactly the thing. 3 black SUVs, the kind with tinted windows and no plates visible from the street, parked in a clean line in front of her building like they had been placed there with a ruler. Engines off. No one getting in or out. Cynthia slowed without meaning to. She knew this block. She knew the cars that belonged here. Mrs. Patterson's old Buick, the Super's van with the cracked taillight, the rotating collection of rideshares that came and went on weekend mornings. She did not know these cars. Nobody on South Loomis drove cars like these. She stopped at the corner. A man stepped out of the middle vehicle. He was tall, not in the way that reads as casual, but in the way that reads as deliberate, like height that had been trained into usefulness. He wore a dark coat, well-fitted, no logo. His face was Korean, angular, composed in the specific way of someone who had learned a long time ago not to let the outside match the inside. He looked perhaps 35, perhaps older. His hands were in his pockets. He was not looking at his phone or at the building. He was looking directly at her. Cynthia didn't move. He walked toward her at a pace that wasn't rushing and wasn't strolling, something in between. The pace of a man who had already calculated every relevant variable and was now simply closing the distance. He stopped 4 feet away. "Cynthia Jenkins," he said. "Not a question. Who's asking?" Her voice came out steadier than she felt, which she was quietly grateful for. "My name is Kim Do-han." He said it the way people say names that mean something, not with arrogance, but with the simple expectation of recognition. When she didn't react, something shifted almost imperceptibly in his expression. Not surprise, more like recalibration. "You helped someone last night, someone important to me." Cynthia looked at the 3 SUVs, then back at him. "The woman from the diner. My mother." The drizzle continued. Somewhere down the block, a delivery truck reversed with a series of warning beeps. The ordinary sounds of an ordinary morning continuing around something that was neither. "She's all right?" Cynthia asked. "She is." A pause. "Because of you. I bought her a slice of pie." "You did more than that." His eyes, dark, steady, giving away nothing and taking in everything, moved over her face with the focused attention of someone reading a document. "You stayed with her. You kept the owner from putting her out in the rain. You gave her your last bill without being asked and without expecting anything back." Another pause. "I know what was in your apron. I know what you needed that money for." The back of Cynthia's neck went still in that particular way it did when something shifted from uncomfortable to serious. "That's a lot to know about a waitress," she said carefully. "It is," he agreed. He didn't apologize for it. She held his gaze. "What do you want, Mr. Kim?" He reached into his coat, slowly, deliberately, in the manner of someone making sure the gesture wasn't misread, and produced a card. Plain. Matte black. A phone number in silver. Nothing else. He held it out. "I want to settle a debt," he said. "My family owes you. In my family, that matters." Cynthia looked at the card. She didn't take it yet. "I just lost my job," she said, "over that slice of pie. So if settling a debt means a check and a handshake, I'll take the check, but I want you to know it doesn't cover the whole cost." Something moved across his face that was not quite a smile, but lived in the same neighborhood. "It won't be a check." She took the card. He didn't explain everything at the corner. He didn't need to. He told her to be ready by 8 that evening, that a car would come, and that she should bring her sister. When she asked why her sister, he said simply, "Because where you go, she goes. That's already been considered." Then he got back into the middle SUV, and all 3 vehicles pulled away from the curb in a single, unhurried motion. Cynthia stood on the sidewalk of South Loomis, holding a matte black card and the 2-week envelope from Lou and the slow, creeping understanding that the morning had moved in a direction she had not planned for. She went upstairs. Destiny was awake, sitting at the kitchen table with her nursing textbook open and a bowl of cereal going soggy beside it. She was 19 in the way that still had some 16 left in it. Bright-faced, quick, wearing an oversized sweatshirt from a school she hadn't attended, and a look of immediate suspicion when she saw Cynthia's expression. "What happened?" Destiny said. Cynthia set the envelope and the card on the table. "Lou let me go." Destiny looked at the envelope, then at the card. "What's this?" "Something I haven't figured out yet." "Sin. I know." Cynthia sat down across from her. Outside, the drizzle had finally committed to actual rain, a steady sound against the window that filled the silence between them. "I need you to trust me for a few hours." Destiny picked up the matte card and turned it over. Blank on the back. She set it down. "Trust you how?" "Someone's sending a car tonight. I need you to pack a bag. Just a few days' worth." "A car." Destiny's voice was level in the way of someone choosing levelness on purpose. "Whose car?" Cynthia thought about the 3 SUVs, about the woman with the deep green ring, about the man on the corner who knew exactly what had been in her apron at 2 a.m. "I helped someone last night," she said. "Someone who turns out to matter. And now someone who matters to them wants to return the favor." Destiny was quiet for a long moment. She was smart, smarter than people gave her credit for on a first look, which was something she and Cynthia had in common. She read the room the way she read her textbooks, carefully, looking for what the surface language was actually trying to say underneath. "Are we in trouble?" she asked. Cynthia considered the question honestly. I don't think so, she said, but I think we're in something. Destiny looked at her sister. Then she closed the textbook, pushed the soggy cereal aside, and said, I'll pack a bag. The car came at 8 on the exact minute, which itself said something. It was a single black SUV this time, a driver who introduced himself as James and spoke only when spoken to. The route took them north, out of Bridgeport, past the neighborhoods Cynthia knew, and then past the ones she knew only by name, and then into the stretch of North Shore, where the houses stopped being houses and started being statements. The estate was at the end of a private drive behind a gate that opened without the car slowing. Cynthia had known, on some level, that whatever this was would be large. She had not been prepared for the specific kind of large that presses down on you. A limestone building, 3 stories, lit from the outside with the quiet confidence of something that had no need to announce itself. Manicured grounds disappearing into the dark on both sides. A fountain, not running in November, its basin holding a mirror of reflected light. Destiny said nothing. She was looking out the window with her jaw slightly set, which was what she did, instead of showing that she was overwhelmed. They were met at the door by a woman in her 40s who gave her name as Mrs. Cho and spoke in the clipped, efficient register of someone whose job was to make complexity appear seamless. She showed them to a suite on the 2nd floor, 2 bedrooms, a sitting room, windows that looked out over a garden swallowed by dark. The rooms were warm and quiet and immaculately kept. Mr. Kim will see you in the morning, Mrs. Cho said. Tonight you rest. She left. Destiny walked to the window and looked out at the dark garden. Sin, she said quietly. I know. This isn't about a slice of pie. Cynthia sat on the edge of the bed, still in her jacket, and looked at the matte black card she'd been carrying in her pocket all day. The silver number. The weight of it, which was not the weight of paper. No, she said. I don't think it ever was. Outside, somewhere in the rooms below, the house was alive with a low sound of movement. Footsteps, voices too quiet to make out, the soft percussion of a world operating at a frequency she hadn't learned yet. She could feel the size of it, the way you feel a current in water before you understand which way it's moving. She thought about Lou's counter, the linoleum she'd memorized, the couple in booth 5 who never made eye contact, the life she'd spent 4 years maintaining because maintenance was what she knew how to do. She thought about the woman with the deep green ring, sitting straight-backed and deliberate over a slice of cherry pie, studying her like a painting with something to say. You didn't have to do that either. Nobody has to do anything. Doesn't mean it's not the right call. Cynthia set the card on the nightstand and finally took off her jacket. She didn't know what morning would bring. She didn't know the name of the game being played in this house, or how far the board extended, or where she stood on it. She didn't know what Kim Doohan wanted from her, or what his mother had seen in a broke Waitress at 2 a.m. that had been worth 3 black SUVs and a limestone estate and a suite with warm rooms and a view of a garden she couldn't yet see. What she knew was this: she had shown up once for a stranger at a cost she couldn't afford, and the city had noticed. Subscribe to see how this unfolds, and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. I want to say hello to you and see exactly how far this story is traveling. Morning came the way it does in houses that have staff, quietly, efficiently, without asking permission. Cynthia heard movement before she opened her eyes. The soft click of a door somewhere down the hall, the distant sound of something being prepared in a kitchen below, the particular silence of a building that was never fully asleep but knew how to pretend. She had slept in her clothes. She sat up, looked at the room, and let herself take it in properly for the first time. Last night it had been too much to absorb all at once. The limestone walls, the heavy curtains, the kind of furniture that doesn't come from a catalog. Now, in the gray morning light, she could see the details more clearly. A writing desk in the corner with a lamp that had a real brass base. Bookshelves built into the wall, full and organized by someone who actually read them. A rug on the hardwood floor that probably cost more than 6 months of her rent on South Loomis, maybe more than a full year. She went to the window. The garden she hadn't been able to see last night was visible now, formal, geometric, the kind that required someone whose entire job was maintaining its precision. Perfectly trimmed hedges running in parallel lines. Stone paths intersecting at deliberate angles, a bare ornamental tree at the center, its branches reaching upward like open hands. Beyond the garden, a stone wall. Beyond the wall, the tops of bare November trees. No neighboring houses visible, no street noise, just the estate, complete and contained, existing entirely on its own terms, indifferent to everything outside it. Destiny was already awake in the next room. Cynthia could hear her moving, the quiet sounds of someone who had also slept uneasily in an unfamiliar place and was compensating by staying busy. She knocked twice and pushed the door open. Destiny was sitting cross-legged on her bed with her nursing textbook open across her lap and a highlighter in her hand, because Destiny's response to uncertainty had always been to return to the thing she was certain about. It was the quality Cynthia admired most in her and worried about most in equal measure. That ability to put her head down and keep going, regardless of the ground shifting underneath. "Did you sleep?" Cynthia asked. "Some." Destiny didn't look up from the page immediately. "There's a tray outside your door. Food. Coffee. It was there when I checked at 6. You checked at 6. I wasn't sleeping at 6. She looked up then, and her eyes held the particular expression she used when she had been thinking hard about something for a long time and had not yet decided whether to say it. She didn't say it. She looked back at her textbook. "The coffee's probably still warm." Cynthia went back to her room and found the tray. A proper coffee pot, not a carafe, with a small pitcher of cream beside it and a cup that had actual weight to it. Sliced fruit. Toast cut on the diagonal. Everything arranged with the kind of care that was either genuine hospitality or a very refined performance of it, and she wasn't yet certain which. She drank the coffee standing at the window, watching the bare garden in the cold morning light, and thought about the fact that yesterday at this time she had been carrying an empty apron and a termination envelope and a final notice from a lender she hadn't fully understood. She thought about that lender now. The name on the notification, Lonebridge Financial. The fine print she had read twice and not questioned because she had needed the money and the need had made the terms feel like details. She pushed the thought aside. Not because it wasn't important. Because she needed to be present for what was coming first. Mrs. Cho knocked at 9 precisely and said that Mr. Kim would receive her in the study on the ground floor. Not see her, receive her. Cynthia noticed the word and what it implied about how this household understood itself. She followed Mrs. Cho down a staircase wide enough for 3 people, through a hallway lined with framed artwork that she didn't have the vocabulary to name, but understood instinctively was serious. The kind of art that doesn't decorate a wall, but occupies it. Past a formal dining room with a table long enough for 12, currently set for no one. Past a room with closed doors that she did not ask about. To a door at the far end of the ground floor wing, solid and dark framed, which Mrs. Cho knocked on once before opening and stepping aside. Cynthia walked in. The study had floor-to-ceiling bookshelves on 2 walls, packed and organized with the specific density of someone who read for information rather than appearance. A fireplace on the 3rd wall with a low fire burning steadily, throwing warm light across a rug the color of deep water. A desk near the window that looked out over the front drive, its surface clean, except for a single open folder and a pen placed parallel to its edge with the precision of habit. Duhan was standing near the window when she entered, not positioned behind the desk in the architecture of authority, which she had expected and prepared for, but standing with his coffee cup and looking out at the gray morning drive with the posture of someone in the middle of a thought. He turned when she came in, and in the full morning light of the study, he was more precisely himself than he had been on the rain-wet corner of South Loomis. The coat was gone. He wore a dark shirt, fitted without being showy, and trousers that were expensive in the way of things that never need to announce it. He had the build of someone who kept himself useful rather than decorative, and the stillness of someone who had trained himself out of unnecessary movement. His face was composed and attentive, giving away exactly what he chose to give and holding the rest with complete discipline. He gestured to the chair across from the fireplace without speaking. She sat. He set his coffee on the desk and took the chair at an angle to hers, close enough for conversation, far enough to make it clear he understood the value of not crowding a person he was still reading. "How did you sleep?" he asked. Well enough, she said. Your house doesn't make noise it doesn't intend to make. Something close to acknowledgement moved across his face. That's intentional. He looked at her with that focused attention she was beginning to recognize as simply how he engaged with anything he considered worth engaging with fully. You want to understand what this is. I want to understand what this is, she said. He leaned back slightly, unhurried. My mother came home 2 nights ago and told me 3 things about you. That you were honest, that you were unafraid, and that you gave without accounting for the return. He paused. The third one is the rarest. People who give without calculating the return are either genuinely without want, which almost never exists, or they are operating from something deeper than strategy, something that can't be trained into a person. He held her gaze. I needed to know which you were. And now, I'm closer to knowing. He didn't rush it. What I'm offering you is this, a position in this household, under the protection of my family. Your outstanding debt to Lonebridge Financial will be settled today, fully, with no balance carried forward. Your sister's tuition for the remainder of her nursing program will be covered without condition. You and she will continue in the suite you occupied last night for as long as the arrangement between us holds and as long as you choose to remain. Cynthia was quiet. The fire made its small sounds. Outside the window, a light wind moved through the bare trees at the edge of the drive. What does the arrangement require from me? She asked. 3 things. He held up one finger. Your presence in this house and at certain functions. Not as staff, as a member of this household. A second finger. Your complete discretion regarding everything you see, hear, and come to understand inside these walls. A third. Your honesty. Always and without exception, even when it costs you something, especially then. That's a significant offer for a $20 bill and a slice of pie. It was never about the pie. His voice remained level, but something underneath it shifted in the way that deep water shifts when something moves far below the surface. My mother is the axis around which everything in my life turns. What you did, the specific way you did it, without hesitation, without looking for acknowledgement, that quality cannot be hired. I can employ competence in abundance. I cannot replicate what you showed in that diner at 2 a.m. when you had nothing to gain and everything to lose. Cynthia looked at the fire for a moment, measuring it the way she measured everything, not with distrust, but with the careful attention of someone who had learned that the cost of not measuring was always higher than the cost of taking the time. Loyalty to what exactly? She said. Because I won't agree to something I haven't fully understood. That's not stubbornness. That's just how I operate. The quality that crossed his face this time was unmistakably close to respect. The Kim family, this household and its interests. What occurs within these walls remains within these walls. Who you encounter here, you do not discuss outside. The business I operate in this city is substantial and not simple. I will not ask you to act against your conscience. I will ask you to be present, to be observant, and to understand that the rules governing this house are different from the ones governing the world you came from. Different how? He considered that for a moment. More direct, he said. In this house, everyone understands what they want and states it plainly. There is no performance of innocence, no pretending that things are other than what they are. He looked at her steadily. I find that most people, when they encounter that kind of directness for the first time, find it unsettling. It looks like danger. It is actually the opposite. Cynthia sat with that. She thought about Lou, who had smiled at customers while skimming the register and docked employee pay for imaginary breakage. She thought about the couple in booth 5 who came in after every fight and pretended over coffee that nothing had happened. She thought about the Lonebridge notification on her phone, the fine print, the compounding penalties, the name of an institution she had never been able to put a face to. If I say no, she asked, James drives you and your sister home before noon. Your 2-week envelope from your previous employer remains yours. I find a different way to honor what my family owes you. He said it without any weight of pressure behind it. You are not here under obligation, Miss Jenkins. You are here because you were invited. The difference between those 2 things is not small to me. She looked at him for a long moment, at the controlled face and the steady eyes and the fire burning low and even behind him. Yes, she said, with one condition. He waited. My sister's life improves and stays her own. She keeps her school schedule, her independence, her own shape. Whatever this arrangement is, it belongs to me. She is here because I need to know she is safe. She is not a participant. She is not an asset. She is my sister, and that is the only category she occupies in this house. Duhan looked at her without blinking for a long moment. Agreed, he said, completely and without reservation. Cynthia's story is just getting started, and the next chapter raises everything. The danger, the stakes, the truth she hasn't been told yet. Subscribe right now so you're there when it drops. Like this video so it finds the people who need it. And drop a comment with your location and the time, because I want to know exactly how far this story is traveling, and I want to greet every single person on that map by name. The estate had a rhythm that Cynthia absorbed over the days that followed, the way she had absorbed every environment she had ever occupied, through observation, through repetition, through the patient accumulation of pattern. Staff who moved with the quiet efficiency of people entirely settled in their roles. Meals at consistent hours, served without ceremony, but with a standard of quality she had no prior reference point for. Rooms that were open and rooms that remained closed, and the unspoken clarity of which was which. Destiny adapted with the focused pragmatism that had always been her defining quality. Better light for studying, a kitchen available at any hour, a room that was genuinely quiet. She asked few questions and watched everything and went about her coursework with the disciplined momentum of someone who understood that her window was limited and intended to use every hour of it. Cynthia moved through the house like someone learning a new language, carefully, attentively, making note of everything without yet being fluent in any of it. She was not asked to do anything specific in those first days. She understood that the absence of instruction was itself a form of observation. She was being watched the same way she was watching, quietly, from a considered distance, building an accurate picture. It was on the fourth morning that the old woman came to find her. Cynthia had fallen into the habit of walking the garden after breakfast, not for any particular reason she could name. The cold didn't encourage it, and the garden in November had none of the color it would carry in other seasons. But there was something about the geometry of it, the deliberate order of the stone paths and the measured distances between the hedgerows that helped her think. She needed to think. There was a great deal to think about. The old woman appeared from the side entrance of the house, moving with the careful, upright deliberateness of someone who had accepted certain physical limitations without ever allowing them to become the governing fact of how she presented herself. She carried a walking stick that she used with complete matter-of-factness. She was dressed simply, dark trousers, a pale blouse, a gray cardigan buttoned against the cold. Her silver hair was pinned back with precision. She looked nothing like the woman who had stood disoriented in Lou's doorway in a ruined coat, and yet the eyes were exactly the same, dark, deep, taking in more than they gave back. She fell into step beside Cynthia without asking permission and without announcing herself in the manner of someone who had never needed to request entry into any space she chose to occupy. "You walk the outer edge first," she said, "then the center path, always counterclockwise. You have done it the same way every morning." Cynthia glanced at her. "I didn't realize I had a pattern." "Everyone has a pattern." The old woman moved at a measured pace, her stick making a soft, even sound on the stone. Most people simply cannot see their own. That is how patterns become vulnerabilities. She paused to examine a dormant rosebush with the focused interest of someone who already knew exactly what it would look like in May. "My son tells me you ask the right questions." "What makes them the right questions?" "They revealed that you understood there are costs before there are benefits. Most people, when offered what you were offered, hear only the offer. You heard the structure beneath it." She moved on from the rosebush. "That is not common." They walked in silence for a moment. The cold was steady and dry, the sky the same, even gray it had been all week. "The night at the diner," Cynthia said. "You weren't lost." The old woman continued walking. Her expression did not shift. Several seconds passed, filled only by the sound of their steps and the distant call of a bird somewhere beyond the wall. "Define lost," she said finally. "You knew where you were. You understood what was happening around you. The confusion, it wasn't real." Another pause. longer and more deliberate than the first. I knew where I was, she said carefully. I did not fully know what I would find there, as those are different things. She glanced at Cynthia sideways, that same precise measuring look from the diner. I was not expecting you. That part was not a performance. Cynthia walked with that for a moment. Let it settle. How much of this city does your son's operation touch? She asked. The old woman's mouth moved slightly. Not quite a smile, something more considered. Why do you ask it that way? Because I grew up 6 blocks from where he met me. I want to understand what I've been standing inside of without knowing it. They reached the center of the garden, the stone bench beside the bare ornamental tree. The old woman lowered herself onto it with the careful dignity of someone who had made peace with needing to be careful, and looked up at the gray sky with an expression that was entirely unreadable. Sit, she said. Cynthia sat. This city, the old woman began, is not what it appears from the window of any diner on any corner. It is a structure. Layered, precise, operating according to rules that most people who live inside it never learn to see. She folded both hands over the top of her walking stick. There are those who built the structure, those who maintain it, those who move through it believing they are free, when in fact, their movement has been accounted for. She looked at Cynthia directly, without softening. You have been in that last category. You were placed, managed, and directed without your knowledge. You must sit with that truth before you can move past it. The loan, Cynthia said. Her voice was even. Loan Bridge Financial. The old woman was still. It was his, Cynthia said. Your son's, wasn't it? The stillness stretched long enough to carry its own answer, heavy and complete, filling the cold air between them like something solid. Cynthia looked at the bare tree, at the reaching branches against the gray sky. The feeling moving through her was not simple anger. It was more layered than that, the particular disorientation of understanding that a room you thought you knew has always had a door in it that you were never shown. The specific weight of realizing that your struggle, which had felt so entirely your own, had been observed from somewhere you never thought to look. That conversation belongs to my son, the old woman said. When the time is right. And when is that? When you are ready to hear it without letting it diminish you. She looked at Cynthia with the directness of someone who had spent a lifetime saying difficult things plainly and had never once regretted the practice. You have something that cannot be manufactured or purchased or taught, child. You see people. You saw me in that diner when every other person in the room had already decided I was not worth their attention. In the world my son operates in any world worth navigating, that ability is not a small thing. It is nearly everything. Cynthia was quiet. Everyone wants something, the old woman continued. That is not a dark observation. It is the blueprint. When you understand what each person in a room wants, truly wants, underneath what they say, you understand how the room is built. When you understand how the room is built, you are no longer subject to it. She paused. You begin to move within it by choice. And what do you want? Cynthia asked. The old woman looked at her for a long, unhurried moment. The garden was still around them. The city beyond the wall continued its indifferent motion. But here, on this bench, in this cold geometric space, everything had gone very quiet. I want to know, she said softly, that when I am no longer present to watch over my son, there is someone standing close to him with a clear eye and an honest voice. Someone who will tell him the truth when the truth is hard. Someone who does not want anything from him that would compromise that honesty. She held Cynthia's gaze. I have been looking for that person for a long time. The words landed quietly and stayed. Cynthia did not answer. She had no answer yet that was honest enough to give. But she sat with the question the way you sit with something that has just permanently altered the shape of what you thought you were doing. Carefully, without rushing, letting the new weight find its place. Somewhere beyond the wall, the city moved, running on its hidden rules and its unseen architecture, full of people who were pieces on a board they had never been shown. Cynthia Jenkins looked at the bare, reaching tree and understood, for the first time, that she was beginning to see the board. Subscribe to see how this unfolds, and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. I want to say hello to you personally and find out just how far our story is traveling. She found him by accident. It was past midnight on a Thursday, 11 days into her time at the estate, and Cynthia had gotten into the habit of late nights in the kitchen. Not because she couldn't sleep, though that was sometimes true. More because the kitchen was the one room in the house that felt closest to a language she already spoke. The commercial range, the organized shelves, the clean logic of a space built around function, it reminded her of Lou's, minus the grease smell and the resentment. She would make tea, sit at the long prep counter, and think through the things the days kept handing her. She was filling the kettle when she heard him. Not a sound that announced itself, more like the quality of silence changing, a shift in the air that her body registered before her mind caught up. She set the kettle down and turned toward the hallway that connected the kitchen to the east wing. The door at the end was slightly open, a thin line of light beneath it. She pushed it open. Duhan was sitting on the bench against the wall of the east corridor, shirtless, his back against the stone. His right arm was resting across his knee, and there was a wound on the upper part of it, a deep cut that had bled considerably and was still bleeding with the slow persistence of something that had been ignored too long. A folded cloth, already soaked through, was pressed against it with his left hand. His head was tilted back against the wall and his eyes were closed, but the set of his jaw said he was not sleeping. He was simply conserving. On the floor beside him, a bottle of whiskey, mostly full, and a small case that had been opened but not used. Cynthia stood in the doorway for exactly 2 seconds. Then she walked to him. "How long?" she said. He opened his eyes. If her presence surprised him, he gave no indication of it. Just that same steady, calibrated attention, slightly muted now by pain and exhaustion. "An hour, maybe more. And you didn't call anyone. It's handled. It is very clearly not handled." She crouched beside him and moved the soaked cloth aside before he could object. The cut was long and clean-edged, the kind that needed closing. It was not life-threatening, but it was serious enough to demand more than a folded cloth and a bottle of whiskey. "Where's your medical kit? A real one." He gestured toward the open case on the floor. She pulled it toward her and went through it with the efficiency of someone who had spent years being the person in every room who figured out what needed to be done and did it. Needle, thread, antiseptic, gauze, everything present, nothing prepared. "This is going to require stitches," she said. "I know. Have you done this before?" A pause. "Had it done." "That's not the same thing." She looked up at him. "I need you to be still, and I need the whiskey. Not for you to drink, though you can if you need to. For the wound." He handed her the bottle without argument. That, more than anything, told her how much the hour of blood loss had cost him. Duhan was not a man who handed things over without consideration. She worked methodically. She had learned basic wound care from a YouTube tutorial 4 years ago when Destiny had cut her hand badly on a broken jar, and they couldn't afford urgent care on a Sunday night. She had practiced it once after that on herself, a smaller cut from a kitchen knife. She was not a medical professional, and she didn't pretend otherwise. But her hands were steady, and she understood the principle: clean, close, protect. And she did not panic, which in the present circumstances was perhaps the most important qualification. She cleaned the wound with antiseptic, which made the muscle in his jaw tighten but produced no other visible response. She threaded the needle with the small, focused breath she used whenever she was doing something that required her full attention. She looked up at him once before she started. "Tell me if I need to stop," she said. "You won't need to stop," he said. She worked. The kitchen was quiet behind her. The corridor was lit by a single overhead light that cast everything in a clean, honest brightness that left no shadows to hide in. She could hear his breathing. Controlled, steady, the deliberate rhythm of someone managing discomfort through discipline rather than distance. She placed the last stitch and tied it and sat back on her heels and looked at the closed wound with the critical eye of someone checking their own work. "It'll hold," she said. "You need to keep it clean, and you need to actually rest it, which I suspect you won't do." "I'll rest it." "That means not using the arm." "I understood what rest meant, Miss Jenkins." She wrapped the gauze around it with precise, even pressure and secured it. Then she sat back and looked at him properly for the first time since she had crouched down beside him. He was looking at her with an expression she hadn't seen on him before. Not the controlled assessment of their meetings. Not the careful management of information. something quieter, something that had less armor around it. She almost looked away. She didn't. "You should have called someone," she said. "There was no one I wanted to call." She didn't ask what that meant. She understood that some answers reveal themselves better when you don't chase them. She stood, gathered the soiled cloth and the used materials, and set the medical case back in order. She washed her hands at the corridor sink. Then she turned and leaned against the wall across from him, arms folded. "The people who did that," she said carefully. "Are they going to come here?" He looked at her for a long moment. "Why do you ask?" "Because your mother is in this house, and your mother has become important to me. And I would like to know if I need to be paying attention to something I'm currently not paying attention to." Something moved through his expression, deep, brief, impossible to fully name. He reached down and picked up the whiskey bottle with his good arm and held it for a moment without drinking it. "There are people," he said slowly, "who have decided that the most efficient path to what they want runs directly through this family. They have been communicating that position for some time." He set the bottle down. "I have been communicating back. And the arm is part of that conversation. The arm is a punctuation mark," he said, "not the sentence." Cynthia looked at him for a long moment, at the bandaged arm, the bare corridor, the whiskey bottle on the floor beside a medical case that had been sitting ready and unused while he bled for an hour rather than ask for help. "Next time," she said, "call me." He looked up at her. "I mean it," she said. "Whatever this is, whatever's coming, I am not a guest here anymore. You said I was family. Family doesn't sit in a hallway alone for an hour bleeding on the floor." She held his gaze. "Call me." He was quiet for a long moment. "All right," he said. It came out differently than his other agreements, less formal, less constructed, like something that had been decided rather than calculated. She pushed off the wall and went back to the kitchen to finish making her tea. 6 days later, the roses arrived. They came in the morning, delivered by a courier service that Mrs. Cho had not scheduled and did not recognize. A large arrangement in a white box, long-stemmed red roses wrapped in black ribbon, left at the front gate by the time the security detail reached it. No card, no sender information, just the roses and the ribbon and the white box. Duhan's head of security, a compact and entirely serious man named Park, brought the box to Duhan in the study and set it on the desk without opening it. Cynthia was in the room. She had been going through household correspondence with Mrs. Cho when Park arrived, and she watched Duhan look at the box for a measured moment without touching it. "Clear the east and west wings," Duhan said. His voice was completely level. "My mother goes to the interior room. Now." Park was already moving before the sentence ended. Duhan looked at Cynthia. "Find my mother and stay with her. Don't use the main staircase." "What is it?" she asked. "A message," he said. "Go." She went. She found the old woman in her sitting room on the second floor, already standing. Park must have sent someone ahead, with her walking stick in hand, and the calm, unsurprised expression of a person who had lived long enough in dangerous proximity to recognize its approach. She looked at Cynthia when she appeared in the doorway and said nothing. She simply moved toward her. They took the back stairs together, the old woman moving with deliberate speed, Cynthia one step behind with her hand near but not touching the old woman's elbow, ready but not patronizing, present but not smothering. They reached the ground floor interior corridor, the one that ran through the center of the house, and were 10 steps from the interior room when the world changed. The sound was not what Cynthia had expected. She had expected something enormous, something cinematic. What she heard was more like a deep, structural percussion, a pressure wave more than a noise, a sound that moved through the walls and the floor and the base of her chest simultaneously. Every window on the east side rattled. A painting dropped from its hook in the corridor and hit the floor face down. The lights flickered once, steadied, flickered again, and held. The old woman did not fall. She planted her walking stick and stood. Cynthia's hand found her arm. "Keep moving," she said quietly. They moved. This story belongs to everyone watching it. Subscribe and make sure you never miss a chapter, because once the next one drops, you will not want to be the last one to know what happens. Like this video so more people find Cynthia's story. And tell me in the comments, where in the world are you right now? What time is it? I read every single one. The interior room was behind the wine cellar, accessed through a door that looked like shelving until you knew where to press. Park had shown it to Cynthia in her second week without ceremony or explanation, in the matter-of-fact manner of someone covering a procedural detail. She had memorized the location the same way she memorized everything useful, quietly, without drawing attention to the fact that she was doing it. She pressed the panel. The door released. She brought the old woman inside and pulled the door shut behind them. The room was small and well supplied. A bench along one wall, a water supply, a communication panel, a first aid kit mounted beside the door, a single overhead light that ran on a separate circuit. Everything functional and calm, the way of things that had been prepared for a specific purpose and waited without complaint to serve it. The old woman sat on the bench. Cynthia stood at the door and listened. She could hear, distantly, the sounds of the house reorganizing around the event. Movement, voices at a controlled register, the specific efficient quality of people who had trained for exactly this and were now executing without wasted motion. Then she heard something that was not any of those things. A sound in the wine cellar on the other side of the door, not one of Duhan's people. She had learned their movements over the past weeks, the way she had learned everything else about this house, and this was not that rhythm. This was slower, more deliberate, moving along the wall in the particular way of someone who was trying not to be heard. She looked at the communication panel. The line to Duhan's security frequency showed active. They were operational. She reached for it. Then she heard the cellar door handle move. It moved again. Testing. Slow and methodical, the movement of someone who suspected what was behind the door and was not in a hurry because they believed they were undetected. Cynthia turned from the panel. On the shelf beside the first aid kit, placed there with the same quiet practicality as everything else in the room, was a snub-nosed revolver in a mounted clip. Park had shown her that too, on the same day he showed her the door. He had said, "It is here if it is ever needed." He had said it the way you say things you hope will remain theoretical. She took it from the clip. It was heavier than she had expected and lighter than it needed to be for what she was considering. She checked it the way Park had shown her. Cylinder, loaded, safety. Her hands were steady. That surprised her. She had expected them to shake. They didn't. She positioned herself between the door and the old woman, not to the side, not at an angle, directly between. The old woman looked at her from the bench with those dark, deep eyes and said nothing. She had the composure of someone who had sat in rooms like this before and understood that composure was itself a form of protection. It kept the person standing in front of you from having to manage two situations instead of one. The door handle moved a third time, then stopped. Silence. Then a different sound. Voices in the cellar. More than one now, the controlled, urgent voices of Park's team. Movement, a brief, tense exchange. Then quiet. Then Park's voice, clear and close on the other side of the door. "Miss Jenkins, it's clear. You can open." She didn't move immediately. "Miss Jenkins?" A pause. "I'm going to say the word we established. Are you ready?" She remembered. Second week. The word was ordinary and random for exactly that reason. "Rainfall," Park said. She released the breath she had been holding and lowered the revolver. She opened the door. Park stood in the wine cellar with two of his team, all three of them breathing with the controlled evenness of recent exertion. Behind them, the cellar was undisturbed. The racks of bottles in their neat rows, the stone floor, the low ceiling. Whatever had been in this room was no longer. "The house is secure," Park said. He looked at the revolver in her hand, then at her face, with an expression she couldn't fully read. "Mr. Kim is asking for you both." The old woman stood from the bench and moved past Cynthia into the cellar without waiting. Cynthia followed, returning the revolver to its clip before she left the room, closing the panel door behind her until it clicked back into its appearance of shelving. Duhan was in the main hall when they came up from the lower level. He was standing with Park's second, a woman named Seo, who Cynthia had learned was the sharpest tactical mind in the building, reviewing something on a tablet held between them. He looked up when Cynthia and his mother appeared at the hall entrance. He looked at his mother first, the specific, rapid assessment of a person checking on the most important variable. His mother met his eyes with the calm authority of someone who intended to be thoroughly debriefed and was in no distress whatsoever. Then he looked at Cynthia. There was something in that look that was different from every previous version of it. All the calibration and measurement were still present. Those never left his face entirely. But underneath them, in the place where the armor was thinnest, there was something that had been moved. He crossed the hall to his mother. He did not embrace her. That was not the language of this family, not in the presence of staff. But he stood close to her and spoke to her in Korean, low and direct, and she responded with a single sentence that made something in his shoulders release by a fraction. He nodded once. He looked at Seo and said something brief and operational. She left. Then he turned to Cynthia. "You took her to the interior room," he said. "You told me to find her and stay with her." "I told you to find her. I didn't specify the interior room." "I know where the interior room is," she said simply. It seemed like the relevant piece of information to use. He looked at her. "Park says someone reached the cellar access. They tested the door. And I was on the other side of it." He was quiet for a moment. In the silence of the hall, with the house resettled around them and the event absorbed into the past tense where events go when they have been managed, she could hear the particular quality of his stillness. Not the stillness of nothing happening, but the stillness of a great deal happening very far below the surface. "You were armed," he said. It was not a question. Park had clearly reported completely. "There was a revolver in the room," she said. "It was there for a reason. I used the reason." "Have you ever fired one?" "No." "And if the door had opened?" She met his eyes. "Then I would have found out what I was made of." The hall was quiet around them. Somewhere in the east wing, the sound of Park's team continued their methodical work, checking, clearing, documenting. The ordinary sounds of a house returning to itself after being tested. Duhan looked at her for a long moment, longer than usual, in the way of someone who has finished calculating and arrived at something that isn't a calculation anymore. "Come," he said. "If you made it this far, you are exactly the kind of person this story was written for. Subscribe, because the next chapter is where everything changes. So the algorithm knows this story deserves to be seen. And comment below with your location and the time you're watching. I want to build a map of everywhere this story has landed." He took her to the study. The fire had been rebuilt and was burning properly now, filling the room with warmth that the rest of the house had lost in the cold hours of the morning. He poured 2 glasses of water from the carafe on the side table. Not whiskey, not anything ceremonial. Just water, practical and clean, because they were both past performance for the evening. He handed her one. She took it. He stood near the fire, his back partly to it, and looked at the room for a moment, in the way of someone collecting themselves, not from fear, but from the particular weight of a night that had required everything and left a residue. His mother appeared in the doorway. She looked at the two of them, her son and the waitress from the diner on Halsted, standing in the firelit study with water glasses and the specific quiet of people who had just come through something together. Her expression was composed and unreadable in the way it always was. But there was something in her eyes that Cynthia had learned to recognize over the weeks, the particular light of someone seeing what they had hoped to see. She looked at her son. She said one sentence in Korean. Then she left. Cynthia looked at Duhan. "What did she say?" He was quiet for a moment. He looked at the fire. "She said she told me so," he said. Cynthia almost smiled. Duhan set his water glass on the mantel and turned to face her fully. The controlled face was present, as it always was. But the layer beneath it, the one she had begun to learn to read in the weeks inside this house, was more visible tonight than it had ever been. The events of the evening had done what events of sufficient weight sometimes do. They had moved things to the surface that usually stayed down. "I owe you something," he said. "You cleared my debt," she said. "You covered Destiny's tuition. We're not uneven. I'm not talking about money." He held her gaze. "I'm talking about trust, the kind that can't be purchased and can't be manufactured." He paused. "You went into that room with my mother, and you stood between her and a door you didn't know what was behind. You did it without being asked, without being trained for it, without anything except the decision to do it." He was quiet for a moment. "That is not something I can account for in the language of debts and payments. It sits in a different place than that." Cynthia looked at him. "She matters to me," she said. "I know that might seem fast. 11 days is not a long time, But she matters to me. It doesn't seem fast, he said. Some things are established quickly when the conditions are right. My mother has that effect on people worth keeping. He picked up his water glass again and looked at it for a moment. Then he looked at her with an expression that had none of its usual management in it, direct and unguarded, the face of someone who had decided to say the true thing plainly. In this house, he said, you are family. That word means something specific here. It means that what happens to this family, I consider as happening to you. It means that the people who sent those roses tonight, they have added your name to the list of things I protect. He held her gaze, and it means that nobody, no one, from any direction, for any reason, touches my family. The fire moved in the grate. The house held its warmth around them. Outside, the November city continued its motion, indifferent and vast, running on its hidden rules and its layered architecture. Cynthia Jenkins stood in the firelit study of a limestone estate on the North Shore and understood that she had not simply changed addresses on the night those black SUVs appeared on South Loomis. She had changed categories. She was no longer invisible. She was no longer a piece moved by hands she couldn't see. She was no longer the woman in the worn sneakers counting her last $20 and hoping the gas bill could wait another week. She was something the city did not yet have a name for, but it would learn one. All right, she said. It was the same word she had used in this room weeks ago, across a fireplace and a careful negotiation. But it meant something entirely different now. Then it had been agreement. Now it was arrival. Duhan looked at her and something in his face settled. Not softened, not weakened, but settled. The way a foundation settles when it has found its depth. He raised his water glass slightly. She raised hers. They didn't say anything else. They didn't need to. Some understandings are complete without ceremony, and this one had been built over 11 days and a slice of cherry pie and a $20 bill and a corridor in the dark and a door that had been tested and not opened. It was built, and it held. And in the morning, the city would still be out there. The soul serpents and their cold corporate hunger, the hidden architecture of power and debt, the neighborhoods being swallowed block by block, the game that most people played without ever seeing the board. But Cynthia Jenkins would be standing inside the walls of the Kim family now. And the woman who had once been called nobody by a man in a black SUV on a rain-wet street was about to become the most important thing those walls protected. Not because anyone had given her that position. Because she had earned it in a diner at 2 a.m. with her last $20 and her whole heart. And that, in the end, was the only currency that had ever mattered. Subscribe to see how this unfolds, and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. I want to say hello to you personally and find out just how far our story has reached. Let's see how wide this world goes together.